My answer, oh, we're recording. My answer to the question of what I love about Tacoma, Washington, where PLU is here, is that we're in the shadow of Mount Rainier. So the picture I have here on the slide shows our beautiful Mount Tahoma or Rainier that we almost, well, not every day get to see. Right now it's snowing, so it's pretty socked in, but we love our volcanoes here in Washington. So, I'm talking about Instructor Talk today. This is a project I started many years ago now in Kimberly Tanner's lab at Seapole, and that we've continued to collaborate on for many years now. I took sort of a hiatus and did some other work thinking about student sense of belonging and some other work. And this is a project that I've been wanting to come back to and do some more work with. And so thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about it and start thinking about it again as we're moving towards new projects. So I wanted to start out with just sort of assessing where folks are at. So if you don't mind sharing in the chat your previous experience with Instructor Talk, is it something that's brand new to you today? Something you've heard of? Something you've used in your teaching, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, something you've studied as a researcher. Where do you fall in sort of experience? Great. Okay, lots. I see all the letters. Excellent. Great. Yeah, I would say probably anyone who's been in a classroom is likely to have used Instructor Talk, whether they realized it or not. So let me tell you about what it is and why I got into studying it. When I got to Seapole at San Francisco State in my postdoc it was 2013. There was a lot of movement and energy towards using more active learning in the classroom, but not always very clear understanding of what worked and what didn't. And some folks would report very high student resistance, where other folks would say students are really engaged and excited, and it's, changed my teaching in all these wonderful ways. And so there was quite a mix. There may still be today. But we really were curious about what the sort of special sauce was that made active learning work in the classroom. And so we decided to go and look at it. And we were particularly interested in seeing where it works and understanding the variables that help that. We sort of predicted that there might be something instructors are saying that mattered in terms of framing class activities or something like that. So we went in and we started with things that are said by the instructor to the whole class during class time. We excluded all course content, like all the biology concepts that were being taught, and any sort of agenda items. We found there was a lot of language that was about this is due Friday, don't forget that on Monday, we have lab, that we didn't feel like really added to our study, so that got excluded. And so we were interested in studying what instructors say because it seemed like an important variable. It had been studied before. Instructor immediacy includes some literature on the social distance between instructors and students. And so when students feel somewhat more socially connected to instructors, they've shown some impacts on learning. We know in student resistance is an issue, and that was one of the ones that we were most interested early on in this project, is where students resist this sort of active learning stuff that we're doing in the classroom. And stereotype threat, there's been studies that have shown that small changes in what instructors say in terms of setting up high stakes assessments can have a big impact on whether students who face those stereotype threats score similarly to those who do not, or score really different in high stakes exam situations. So lots of studies of what instructors say are out there, and certainly what instructors say matter in various ways. So we'll just start. I know some of you have more and some of you have less experience with this instructor talk stuff. So I want you to just think to yourself and then maybe share out in the chat um, something you tell your students that is not the content you teach. Like, what is something else you say to students that's not the content, and maybe not agenda items if you can avoid those. I gotta find the chat again. Oops. Yeah. Yeah, sharing a little information about your family or showing them a picture, sharing experiences of first gen students, what to do if students are or are not meeting their goals, personal experiences, information on connecting to other things around campus, study abroad, your family. Yeah, great. Yeah, so many things we don't always really think about all the things that we're saying that are not the actual content, but some great examples of instructor talk right there. The first study that we did to develop the instructor talk framework intentionally sampled a classroom that used a lot of active learning, but faced very little student resistance. Students were generally bought into the active learning. It was a class that was co-taught, so we got to hear from two different instructors in that class, and we had recordings of over the course of the whole semester, minus things like exam days. So we collected all of that and transcribed everything. And I went through with a highlighter and found everything that was non-content that fit into our criteria. And eventually that was developed into 600 and over 600 quotes, and five different categories and 17 subcategories of instructor talk. So I'll show you the framework that came out of that initial study of instructor talk. This is back in 2015. The five categories we identified were building the instructor-student relationship, establishing class culture, explaining pedagogical choices, sharing personal experiences, and unmasking science. The one that I had most predicted to see a lot of was explaining pedagogical choices. I thought, well, if there's resistance, then telling students why you're doing what you do will clearly um, make it more clear so that they feel supported in their learning. But the two that were maybe the biggest surprise were the building instructor-student relationship and establishing class culture. And you can see the subcategories of those correlating with the bar colors here on the right. Um, but yeah, it was just interesting to see that this was here, uh, and to start to share some of that language. The next study that was done was led by Colin Harrison, who I think spoke to this group a couple years ago. And so for those who it's familiar to, it may be from that last NIST meeting a couple years ago. And he analyzed eight whole courses and then developed a sampling strategy where you could look at instructor talk in short segments on the first day of class and mid-semester and get a sense of instructor talk that was sort of an enriched sample of the instructor talk in the course overall. So, 61 different courses. This was instructors across four-year university biology faculty as well as community college biology faculty. And so we got to see a wide variety there. And what they found was that a lot of what was characterized in just that one class initially was found in all of these other classes with 55 different instructors. So it was really interesting to see how well the original framework aligned with a lot of the instructor talk they found. They also found some parallel, sort of negatively phrased instructor talk. And so they developed a second piece of the framework that I'll show you that parallels what I just showed you. From the first study, we now call that the positively phrased instructor talk. And then what I'm showing you now is the sort of parallel negatively phrased instructor talk framework. So dismantling the student instructor relationship, disestablishing classroom culture, compromising pedagogical choices, sharing personal judgments, and masking science or making it more opaque. So again, this is many hundreds of quotes and wide variety of instructors. Some interesting things that their study also found besides the sampling strategy was that Instructor Talk was present in every classroom that we looked at. Every instructor was using some amount of Instructor Talk, but the amount varied widely. So, this is the point where I usually find that folks have a lot to say about this and in reflecting on their own teaching. And I really wanted to take today into your classroom contexts so you can think about what's happening in what you do. So, we're going to spend a little time in breakout rooms looking at this framework. It's got all the categories here in bold and then in parentheses, the subcategories for each. And on the link that I'm going to give you to the Google Slides, um, it has some questions to consider. So I want you to start by picking a very specific course that you teach. We all typically teach more than one thing, and if you only teach one thing, that's fine as well. But choose a specific class rather than thinking broadly across all the classes you teach. And then I want you to explore and discuss the Instructor Talk framework. So some questions you might consider. Are there categories you use often? Are there categories you would like to use more of or less of? Which categories seem like they could be impactful to your students? Have students ever told you things that you said that fit into this framework, right? There's lots that you can think about. So I'm going to give a good like 10 minutes or so to just go into breakout rooms and do some exploring of the framework. So that showed up kind of weird. Does that link work? Let's see. I think it works. Okay. So yeah, click on the link before we send you off to breakout rooms. And then you can have some discussion there on just the first discussion prompts. And we'll check back in about 10 minutes.
Okay, which one am I going to? I Brinda, I'll go ahead and pause the recording and you can restart it when we come back.
That sounds good.
Think everyone's back. Shannon, you're muted.
Sorry, I'd love to hear from anybody conversations that you had, either if you feel like raising a hand and sharing out with the group or putting something in the chat. Any ideas or take-home messages or inspirations from looking at the Instructor Talk framework and talking about it with colleagues. My hope is that all the good stuff is going to really come from the conversations you had. Daniel, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Sorry, I prematurely left my earlier room, so I wanted to
Oh.
complete the thought, but I thought it would be helpful for the group. So I was explaining how I explain my pedagogical choices in my class, and I had a student come up last week in my office hours, and she said, "I'm a psych major. I'm a junior psych major, and there's so much stuff in here, like grounded in best principles and learning psychology." So it was really validating, and I kind of got like some student chatter buy-in that people were like, "Oh yeah, this might be a little weird." So I use alternative grading methods, and so it was just kind of validating for both of us.
That's very cool. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else who wants to share or add in the chat from their conversation?
It seemed like I was with Dan there before he left us on a cliffhanger for a second, but we were kind of struggling to see how kind of we were piecing together those positive talks categories in just kind of different ways. It was hard to kind of parse them out. We realized they were kind of just integrating in many ways at different points in time in our teachings, and also remembering some of those same things that our faculty back in the day had said that were really outside of the material, but still memorable 20 some plus years
Mm.
later that I try to instill and create those relationships, and so some great things for sure.
Thank you. Great. All right. Well, um, I think I need to share my screen again if we're going to get back on the slides here. Apologies, haven't been on Zoom in a while.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute, hasn't it?
Getting back to it. Okay. All right. So there we were. So I wanted to just mention a couple of more recent studies on Instructor Talk. There are quite a few, and it's awesome to see how widely this framework has spread in different groups. So I'm not going to mention all of them, but just a couple to get people thinking. Our conversation, we talked a little bit about a lab course, and there was a study that came out of graduate teaching assistants and the use of Instructor Talk in laboratory courses. And again, we saw Instructor Talk used across the board by the graduate TAs in those courses, and they found that those who had particular pedagogical training at the institution used more than those without. But it's interesting to see that just like in the lecture course context, we saw Instructor Talk used broadly there. Another study looking at what instructors say and do on the first day of class in introductory STEM courses use the Instructor Talk framework to look at the kinds of things instructors are saying. And they found a fair amount of language, particularly those first two categories, the building instructor-student relationship and establishing class culture. But they mentioned that sometimes the specificity or the phrasing led to perhaps some unintentionally negatively phrased instructor talk. So interesting to think about where folks might be trying to say something, in a way that supports a really positive learning environment, but may not come off that way. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Another one by Dax, who is also a CEPL colleague, and this is a really cool paper about student perceptions of instructor talk, which I really like because it starts to get at how students actually interpret this, which matters a lot more than how researchers interpret these quotes that we're reading. So they evaluated positively and negatively and phrased instructor talk, and they did it in a way that was really similar to what researchers do. So I'll show you a couple of figures from that paper that generally if you gave them positively phrased quotes, as shown in part A here, they generally considered them to be promoting a positive learning environment. Negatively phrased instructor talk quotes that were, identified by researchers were generally seen as contributing to a negative and learning environment by students. So students tend to align with researchers. They also showed that students could recall instructor talk from classes in the past. So if you ask students to share quotes that their instructors had said to them in the past, they are able to identify instructor talk and they are remembering it, just like we heard from some of you in sharing out. So most could identify at least one piece of language that fit into the instructor talk framework. Both positive and negative were identified, and they found some interesting things around differences in the ability to remember negatively phrased but not positively phrased instructor talk between members of different groups. So if you essentially women, first gen students, people of color tended to be able to identify negatively phrased instructor talk at a higher rate than those of the majority in each of those categories. So that's sort of an interesting, but that wasn't true in the positively phrased talk. So, we were talking in our breakout room about, the way in which one negatively phrased quote can sometimes outweigh a lot of positively phrased. And we don't have direct data for that, but I think we, as instructors have seen that play out with students, either reporting on student evaluations or talking about another class that they've had this experience in, that it can be very alienating, even just one thing that's impactful. So some things that I've been thinking about in Instructor Talk lately, as an instructor, as a researcher, that I was hoping to have more conversation with you all about One is about the perceived barriers that our students face and how Instructor Talk might be helpful. I've been thinking about how some parts of my Instructor Talk are really different in different classes that I teach. When I teach introductory biology, um, I have students from very different majors, very different biology backgrounds, and I often have a few students coming in saying, I had a student who said, my instructor in biology in high school just made me pancakes every day for breakfast. He said it was just the class was too early. And so instead of doing labs, we just have pancakes and hang out. So I really just don't feel ready for this class. Like all these other students have all this biology and I don't. So I don't know if I can do it. Right. So in my introductory courses, I spend some time, in both in the kind of building instructor-student relationship aspects as well as the establishing class culture that I tell them that your colleagues are a really poor control group for the experiment you're trying to run about who's better at science. Like they're a bad control group because they're really different than you. They have different background and different experiences coming into this. So don't use someone else's experience in this class as what it should be like for you, and we talk about that a little bit because I do have a variety. I have some who have AP credit from last year. I have some who took this a decade ago. I have some, they're so varied. So I think, finding a way to help them realize that is really important to me in that class because I think that's one of the big perceived barriers is they're better at this than I am, therefore I shouldn't be here or I can't do this. And so that's one example. In my upper division classes, that's never the issue. That's not an instructor talk or any language that I'm using. In my upper division classes, I have more of a split between students who are taking their first upper division versus the last one before they graduate. Students who, if I teach virology and they've taken immunology or molecular biology, they have some background in the topic. So those differences are more um, at the forefront, I guess. So, so there's just different contexts and different things students need in those contexts. So that's one of the things that I've been thinking about. And for me, building instructor-student relationship, establishing class culture are two of the places that it's helpful to share. If your experiences in college were a particular way that you identify with some of your students' experiences, sometimes those sharing personal experiences can be really powerful because they see, oh, you're like me. You really struggled in that class or failed the first test, right? Like there's so many things that I think can be very memorable. If you're interested in what students brought up as things that were memorable, you should go look at Dax's paper because some of those example quotes are there. Another one that I've been really interested in sort of thinking about is how humor fits in. Uh, I think I guess from some of the characterizing of negatively phrased instructor talk that I've done, I think some of it is humor that people are trying to use, sort of sarcasm to share with students and share a laugh with students, but it can come off in a transcript form as a negatively phrased. However, we know that all of our students interpret the things we say differently. And I absolutely have students who say, I don't do sarcasm. I don't understand sarcasm, whether it's a language thing, a culture thing, um, a neuroprocessing difference thing. There are lots of reasons that humor is very culturally bound and may not contribute to the learning environment in the ways we think. So those were two areas that I've sort of been thinking about and I thought might be useful to frame a conversation about, yeah, how can one thought I have is about shifting negatively phrased to positively phrased. Like if you're using humor at some point, sort of being really explicit about why you mean this to be inclusive or sort of explaining the joke so everyone's in on it. May not be the best for a stand-up comedian, but for an instructor who's trying to use inclusive pedagogical practices, perhaps um, something to think about. So I wanted to give everyone a chance to have some more conversation about things like humor or the differences in the courses you're teaching. So I was hoping that, your context would really come into play. So you had sort of some initial conversation, got comfortable with the framework, but perhaps another, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes of conversation just about either how Instructor Talk differs in different contexts you teach and or humor and how that plays out for you. So maybe we'll send you all back to breakout rooms. Done yet, but that is certainly that's kind of like the next of
Okay.
like future studies and things that I'd be
Yeah, sure,
interested
sure.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will mention that.
Okay. Cool, cool.
Awesome. Good question. Is everybody back now? Welcome back. All right. I think maybe in the interest of time, we won't fully share out this time, but I am very curious in the conversations you had. So if anybody wants to add anything to the chat that came out of their conversations, would love to hear it. But in order to sort of leave some time for discussion, I wanted to mention some of my interests as I'm getting back into this work, and I'm really excited to um, continue moving it forward. And it's been so cool to see so many other people publish on it. Um, Definitely a big question is, can we see correlations between instructor talk and student learning or student success? And so Catherine was just asking the question of, have we looked at this in the context of students' evaluation of teaching? And the short answer is not to my knowledge. We've sort of anecdotally done that on our own, and but it would be great to be able to do that more broadly. I think Dax's work offers some methodologies for asking students specific questions about instructor talk. So that could potentially be something you add to student evaluations of teaching, but you could also just go in and code and look within the other questions. So that's something I would love to see and better understand. Another area we're really interested is how we code for instructor talk and the possibility of using large language models to more effectively and efficiently, at least efficiently, code instructor talk so that it could be done in a more high throughput way, which might make it easier to do studies like that. We're looking in things like student evaluation of teaching. It also might make for some really interesting faculty development opportunities or chances to do a quick recording, get quick results, and be able to go to students the next class and say, I want to clarify something that, I said it this way, but what I really meant, the spirit of it was this, right? If there's things that we want to clarify. So I'm really excited about that. And that's a project we've are kind of starting to move forward with. So maybe in another year or two, we can come back to NIST. Um, can instructors accurately predict their own use of instructor talk? I think I'd love to actually do that. I don't haven't actually done it yet, but it'd be sort of interesting to see because I think people have a sense of some of the things they say, but to the extent that it correlates with all the things that they say may or may not be true. Um, and then just the kind of faculty development piece of like if we can analyze it more quickly, are there ways that we can use it in real time to better support student learning, community in the classroom, and faculty in doing the work that they do? So those are some areas that I'm interested in moving forward. And thank you so much for all of your time and energy and the conversations in your groups. And if anyone has questions, I'll Be
Thank
happy to
you.
hear
Thank
them.
you so much, Shannon. There are a ton of questions and
Oh
comments
boy.
in the chat. So
Okay, I'm
if you
going
want,
to the chat.
maybe we'll just start
It's
one.
hard to do slides
I
and
know.
pictures and chat, so
Mhm.
So Annie has a question.
yeah.
As you've been looking at Instructor Talk, what do you think has changed or and what has stayed the same? Um, yeah, that's a
Changed or stayed the same in terms of like the research side of it, or in like my use of it in the classroom, or do you mind clarify? Or
Annie, do you want to clarify?
Yeah, sure. I just like, we sort of, while you started this research, or this
yeah,
research was started before
yeah,
COVID, have you
yeah.
seen anything shift from COVID, from using more online resources like this framework? You have the Instructor Talk framework? Like, has any of it changed? Has any what? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the initial framework really changed with the addition of the negatively phrased and positively phrased. That was all pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I know there's some other studies that have looked at beyond just what is said in the classroom by the instructor, toward like looking at syllabus language as well, and emails and other things that instructors send out. So, so that's sort of an expansion beyond just looking at the classroom and kind of all class specific. I've had colleagues interested in potentially looking at asynchronous classes as well when everything is online. So I don't know. I mean, I do think every time people do new studies, I would say there's some amount, usually a small amount of language that doesn't necessarily fit into the framework. So there have been some proposals of some new category or new subcategories usually, or just sort of like catch-all extra language that doesn't quite fit what's there. So small changes. Yeah, thanks. Um, I wonder if LLMs could pick up tone and reaction of students to identify the difference between sarcasm and negative instructor talk. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I guess I wonder if large language models can do it, and also if all students can do it, because those differences can be really subtle, and I think not all students um,
Mhm.
pick up the differences there. So I think, it's possible, but I think it's a very like kind of bound to certain individuals. My family is big into sarcasm, but I definitely know other folks. I have friends who are like, I don't do that. So what does that mean? What are you saying? So it's kind of something that I've moved away from in terms of when I'm talking to all of my students, and when I use humor, it tends to be more with smaller, like, office hour situations, things like that. Let's see. Did I miss any above that? Okay. Um,
Instructor first name versus Dr. So and so, and then also
yeah.
about gender.
I haven't looked at that, the instructor first name versus doctor last name. That is something that I explicitly explain to my students why I go by doctor last name, Dr. Seidel, and why some of my colleagues might not. And that so it's something that I try to just be explicit about so that there's clarity there. And we've talked about it a little bit in our department meetings and things like that. And yeah, so I think it's
What do you tell? I'm curious. What do you tell them about? I
what
mean,
do I tell? Well,
the
I
culture in
tend
our
to
department
say,
is that
you know,
most people use their professional title.
yeah, I think that's more the norm in our department, but I tend to say, some of my male identifying colleagues are more likely to use their first name rather than Dr. So and so. They tend to also be the ones who are um, credited as having a PhD without having to state it.
Oh,
And
good.
I've
Yeah,
had a lot more students identify me as Miss Seidel or Shannon,
very good.
and so
Yeah.
so for me, I use the professional title until you graduate, and then I'd love to have an email conversation and chat with you as a colleague once you graduate. But that's why I use my professional
Thank
title.
you. Thank you for that. I
Yeah.
was wondering. Yeah.
I don't know that there's anything magic to it, but
No, I know. I just
yeah.
Amanda has a great question about, is there any research about Instructor Talk self-censoring regarding the changes in our climate, in our environment? Um, we are at the top of the hour, so I want to respect everyone's time if anyone needs to
Yeah.
leave. But Shannon,
Yes. Thank you so much.
If
Yeah, I'm happy to
if you're
stay
willing to stay a few minutes extra, then we can
for
get to all the
sure.
rest of the questions because I'm so
Yeah.
excited to see there's a lot in the chat.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
So maybe you could address Amanda's question.